Hello friends, now we will start with part 4 of the video lecture series which deals with the summary of the book Brain Energy written by Dr. Christopher M. Palmer, who gives an insightful look into the origins of mental disorders and the methods of treating them. Dr. Palmer's theory can undoubtedly usher in potent therapeutic interventions for pervasive psychiatric conditions for which the standard pharmaceutical approaches have proven minimally effective. In part 1 of the video lecture series, we had discussed about mitochondria and their role in mental and metabolic health. We had discussed the functions of mitochondria. In part 2, we had discussed how an energy imbalance in the brain contributes to mental and metabolic disorders. We had discussed how overactive cell functions, underactive cell functions, absent brain cell functions, developmental disorders causing neurodegenerative developmental abnormalities causing neurodegenerative diseases, and reduced cell maintenance all contribute to mental disorders. In part 3 of the video lecture series, we had discussed certain contributing causes which cause mitochondrial impairment and affect mental and metabolic health. These causes included genetics and epigenetics, chemical imbalances, neurotransmitters, and hormones like insulin. In part 4 of the video lecture series, we will be discussing about psychiatric medications, metabolism, and mitochondria, how the psychiatric medications are having an effect on mitochondria and in turn affecting mental and metabolic health. Now, medications that increase or reduce the levels of neurotransmitters like serotonin, GABA, and dopamine will clearly have an impact on mitochondria and metabolism, because we know that mitochondria and neurotransmitters share a feedback relationship. Mitochondria are directly involved in the production and regulation of neurotransmitters, and neurotransmitters in turn affect mitochondria. For example, the neurotransmitter serotonin, it increases ATP production and increases mitochondrial biogenesis. Mitochondria also have receptors for certain neurotransmitters on them. Now, many medications that change the levels of neurotransmitters will clearly have an impact on mitochondria and metabolism. These medications include antidepressants, anti-anxiety meds, and antipsychotics. Now about a drug called Valium. Valium can reduce anxiety. In a study in rats, it was found that when a rat study was conducted, researchers knew that reduced mitochondrial function in an area of the brain called as nucleus accumbens, it causes social anxiety behaviors. So there is an area of the brain known as the nucleus accumbens which is causing the social anxiety behaviors. When there is reduced mitochondrial function in the nucleus accumbens, it causes social anxiety. Now suppose this is a diagram of a brain, and this region is the nucleus accumbens, and in this there is reduced function of mitochondria which is causing increased social anxiety behaviors. Now Valium, the drug Valium, it was working by activating another area of the brain called as ventral tegmental area, and this other area is sending dopamine to the nucleus accumbens. Valium is activating this ventral tegmental area, and it is ventral tegmental area and is causing this VTA to send dopamine to the nucleus accumbens. And this dopamine will increase the mitochondrial activity in the nucleus accumbens. This will increase the mitochondrial activity in the nucleus accumbens. This will result in higher ATP levels and leading to reduced anxiety and increased social dominance. Now, when the researchers blocked the effects of dopamine, when they blocked the effects of dopamine, they found that the anti-anxiety effect was lost. But then they tried another thing. When they blocked the mitochondrial respiration in the nucleus accumbens, when they blocked the respiration of mitochondria in the nucleus accumbens, causing mitochondrial dysfunction, then also the therapeutic effects of dopamine, then also the anti-anxiety effect was lost. Even though dopamine was being provided by the ventral tegmental area, still the dopamine was not able to give beneficial effects in the NAC, in the nucleus accumbens, because the mitochondria in the nucleus accumbens were dysfunctional. So these mitochondria prevented the cells in the nucleus accumbens from receiving the full benefits of dopamine. So this shows a direct connection between mitochondria and brain health. Now, about monoamine oxidase inhibitors, we know that an enzyme called monoamine oxidase, which is found in the mitochondria, this enzyme monoamine oxidase, it is involved in degradation of certain neurotransmitters like dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, etc. So it is involved in the breakdown of these neurotransmitters. Now when the function of this monoamine oxidase is inhibited by certain antidepressants, then it will not be able to break down these neurotransmitters. As a result, the level of these neurotransmitters is going to increase. So the level is going to increase, and this is going to stimulate the mitochondrial activity, because some of these neurotransmitters, they are known to stimulate the mitochondrial activity. So when their levels increase, it is going to increase the activity of mitochondria. So antidepressants work in this way. So monoamine oxidase inhibitors, a class of antidepressants, they increase epinephrine, norepinephrine and dopamine right outside of mitochondria, thereby stimulating the activity of mitochondria. Then about lithium. Lithium is given in certain psychiatric disorders as a mood stabilizer, and it has been found to increase the ATP production. It has been found to increase antioxidant capacities. That is, it is found to reduce the reactive oxygen species. It has been found to increase antioxidant capacities and improve the calcium signaling within cells. We know that mitochondria are involved in calcium regulation, and calcium plays a role as an essential off switch for cells. So calcium plays a role as an essential off switch, so thereby reducing hyperexcitability in the cells. So lithium improves this calcium signaling, thereby reducing hyperexcitability in the cells and stabilizing the moods. And so all of these, increased ATP production, increased antioxidant capacity, improved calcium signaling, all of them are related to mitochondria. So lithium works in this way by impacting the mitochondria and reducing hyperexcitability. Now many psychotic medications, they are also known to cause serious side effects, serious neurological problems, sometimes even permanent neurological problems like tremors, like muscle rigidity, tardive dyskinesia. So they are known to cause serious neurological problems also. Now what is tardive dyskinesia? It is an involuntary movement disorder. So these are the adverse effects of these psychotic medications, because they cause tremors, involuntary shaking, rigidity of muscles, involuntary movement disorder, and many studies have documented impairment in mitochondrial function at the cellular level. So these medications, these antipsychotic medications, they are impairing the mitochondrial function. They are in a way shutting down the mitochondria, shutting down the cells. So impairment of mitochondrial function at the cellular level, leading to reduced energy production, increased oxidative stress, is caused by these medications. So these medications can prove to be harmful also, but sometimes we need to give these medications, because in certain situations like seizures, etc., the person may die if the person does not receive treatment in the form of medications, although these medications are known to cause serious side effects. Now when a cell is hyperactive, then there are two ways to reduce symptoms. One way is to improve the mitochondrial function, and thereby increase the energy production, so that if the energy production is increased, then the cell is able to repair itself and it is able to function normally again. But then there is a risk involved. What is the risk? That when the energy is increased, then initially the symptoms might get worse. Why? Initially the symptoms might get worse because sometimes when more energy is provided, then some of the metabolically compromised cells, they may become hyperexcitable due to increased energy. So the symptoms might worsen. These cells, hyperexcitable cells, may not be able to stop themselves. This may worsen the symptoms. But in the long run, the hyperexcitability will reduce, because the mitochondrial function has improved. So in the long run, the beneficial effects can be seen, but initially symptoms might get worse. Therefore, when they get more energy initially, they may not be prepared to manage it appropriately. So if the cells are metabolically compromised, then when they get increased energy initially, then they may not be prepared to manage that energy appropriately. And this can cause hyperexcitability in the short term. But in the long term, beneficial effects will be seen and the hyperexcitability will reduce. Now, what is the second strategy? The second strategy is, the first strategy was improving mitochondrial function and energy production. The second strategy is trying to manage these cells by shutting them down. So if a cell is hyperexcitable, we try to shut down the cell. We try to suppress the function of the cell by inhibiting the mitochondria. We try to inhibit the mitochondria in the cell. So this, if you shut down the cell, then it will stop symptoms, at least in the short run. But it will make matters worse in the long term. Why? Because it is suppressing, it is in a way shutting down the cell. It is inhibiting the mitochondrial function. So it may worsen the mitochondrial dysfunction in the long run. Because if a cell is permanently shut down, then it can impair the body's metabolism in the long run. So this is detrimental in the long run. So a treatment that can help in the short run might make things worse in the long run. Then there are other considerations also. The cells are not impacted in the same way. All cells are not likely impacted in the same way. Cells have different inputs. Now cells, they have got different inputs. Cells and mitochondria in them are affected by different inputs, different environmental factors. And these inputs, they will affect different parts of the brain. They'll affect different parts of the brain at different times. So they'll affect different parts of the brain at different times. So these different environmental factors or different inputs will affect different parts of the brain at different times. So this will lead to different symptoms. Environmental factors may be different. One person may be subjected to one environmental factor, another person may be subjected to another environmental factor, and now this person may have impairment in one brain region, another person B may have impairment in another brain region. So, and also these person may be affected at different times. This person A may be affected by, suppose, is schizophrenia at the age of 14. This other person B may be affected by schizophrenia at the age of 42. So because of all these variabilities, the symptoms will also be different. Now medications target specific cells. Medications are targeting specific cells. Now because of the effect of medications, some cells may have improvement in their mitochondrial function. Other cells may remain unaffected, or still other cells might have impairment also in their mitochondrial function. So some cells may have improvement, some other cells may have impairment, and some cells may remain unaffected. So in all the studies done, researchers had to choose specific cells to study. Now even if the medications impair mitochondrial function broadly, we know that some of the psychotropic medications, they are shutting down the cells, they are suppressing the function of mitochondria, inhibiting the mitochondria. So they may prove to be detrimental in the long run. They may worsen the mitochondrial dysfunction in the long run. But we also need to consider the consequences of not treating the person, because if a person is having severe symptoms due to a mental disorder, suppose the person is having seizures, abnormal electrical activity in the brain. Now if you don't give that person immediate treatment, if you don't give that person a psychiatric medication, then that person may die also. So if the condition is an emergency or life-threatening situation, then psychiatric medications need to be given. But we also need to see that these psychiatric medications in the long run, they cause mitochondrial dysfunction. So we need to consider other metabolic interventions also, in the form of a better diet, exercise, improvement in sleep, etc. And these other metabolic interventions can play a beneficial role by improving the mitochondrial function and improving the energy production. Now, suppressing of mitochondrial function, we know that some of the psychiatric medications, they are suppressing the mitochondrial function, and this is going to cause more mitochondrial dysfunction in the long run, and this mitochondrial dysfunction is going to cause reduced metabolic as well as mental health in the long run. So this is obviously not a path to healing. This cannot heal the person. It can only reduce the symptoms. Now the theory of brain energy answers several questions relating to this mental health field, which the mental health field has been unable to answer till date. Now the brain energy theory outlines why the medications that target neurotransmitters like serotonin, norepinephrine, dopamine, all these medications, they are targeting different neurotransmitters, but they can all be used to treat depression. Why? Why even if they are targeting different neurotransmitters, they can all be used to treat the same condition, that is depression. Why? Because all of these medications, they are enhancing or increasing the function of mitochondria. So that is why different medications that are targeting different neurotransmitters, they can all be used to treat the same condition, that is depression. Now this depression can also have different people can have different symptoms of depression because of different inputs to different cells, inputs affecting different parts of the brain at different times, and because of different pre-existing vulnerabilities. But they are all enhancing mitochondrial function, and hence they are used to treat the same condition, that is depression. Now another question is, why doesn't every person respond to the same medications? Why doesn't every person respond to the same medication? Again, the answer is the same. Pre-existing vulnerabilities and different inputs to different cells. Now, 3 persons, A, B, and C, and A is responding to one medication, B is responding to another, and C is responding to yet another medication. Why? Because A, B, and C, they have different pre-existing vulnerabilities. That is, A might have different metabolic health from B and C, and similarly for B and C, and also different inputs. The cells and mitochondria in them, they are affected by different inputs, different environmental factors that are affecting different parts of the brain, and at different times. So all this is the reason why every person is not responding to the same medications. For example, symptoms of depression may come from many different brain regions, not just one. So one person might have one part of the brain impacted, another person might have another part of the brain impacted because of different environmental factors. And this may occur at different times also. The symptoms of depression come from many different brain regions, not just one. Brain circuits, we know that they are all interconnected and they are communicating with each other. So if one area of the brain is malfunctioning, then it can impact the other areas also. So some areas will be more responsive to serotonin, other areas will be more responsive to norepinephrine. So different areas of brain are responsive to different neurotransmitters, but they are all connected. So if one region of the brain, it is metabolically compromised, then it will impact the other regions of the brain as well. Now this theory, that is the brain energy theory, helps us understand why the medications are taking time to work. For example, let us see the example of selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Now what are these SSRIs doing? They are preventing the reuptake of serotonin and they are increasing the serotonin levels. So we know that serotonin levels increase. When serotonin levels increase, they increase the ATP production, they increase the mitochondrial biogenesis. But though serotonin is increasing, the beneficial effects in terms of reducing the effects of depression, they don't come immediately. Though serotonin will increase in a few hours after taking these medications, SSRIs, serotonin will increase in a matter of few hours. But the depression symptoms will not go away in a few hours. the depression symptoms will take 2 to 6 weeks to go away. Why? Because serotonin increases the ATP production in mitochondria, it increases mitochondrial biogenesis, and this process is going to take time. This process is going to take 2 to 6 weeks. So only after 2 to 6 weeks the beneficial effects of SSRI, that is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, will be seen. Now why one medication can be used for a wide variety of disorders? Why one medication can be used for a wide variety of disorders? Why? Because antipsychotic medications are reducing hyperexcitability in many cell types. So these antipsychotic meds can be used for different wide variety of disorders like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety, insomnia, agitation, dementia. Because these medications, they are performing one function, that is they are reducing the hyperexcitability of cells. So they can work in case of many mental disorders. Now these psychiatric medications, they also come with side effects. They have side effects also, and these side effects include reduced functioning of the cognitive areas of the brain, increased appetite, and in elderly they can even come with the warning of increased risk of death. So these are certain side effects of these psychiatric medications. Now we can also now understand why some psychiatric meds, they can induce other symptoms such as antidepressants inducing anxiety, mania, psychosis. Why? Because when you take an antidepressant, it is going to increase energy in the brain. Now this increased energy can also cause some of the cells in the brain to become hyperexcitable, which can increase the symptoms like anxiety, mania, psychosis. And now suppose a person has some pre-existing vulnerability. So that means the person is already metabolically compromised. And now this person having the chances of this person having hyperexcitability, they are more. So people with pre-existing vulnerabilities who already have metabolically compromised cells, it can quickly lead to hyperexcitability and associated symptoms. Now on top of the usual psychiatric medications, the brain energy theory offers reasons why metabolic medications also play a role in mental health. So some metabolic medications like blood pressure medications, they are also used in psychiatry. Blood pressure meds like propranolol, clonidine, prazosin, etc. They are also prescribed for psychiatric disorders like ADHD, PTSD, anxiety disorder, substance use disorder, Tourette syndrome, etc. So metabolic medications are also used in psychiatry. So there was a study which looked at about 1,40,000 patients with mental disorders like schizophrenia, bipolar, and other psychiatric disorders to see if metabolic medications, they had an impact on self-harm and the need for hospitalization in psychiatric patients. So they looked at 3 classes of metabolic medications, and they tried to see if giving these medications reduced the chances of self-harm and reduced the chances of hospitalization, psychiatric hospitalization in these psychiatric patients. They found that they did. So giving these 3 classes of metabolic medications reduced the chances of self-harm, it reduced the chances of psychiatric hospitalization in these psychiatric patients. So metabolic medications are also having a favorable impact on the patients with psychiatric disorders. So this shows a connection between metabolic health and mental health. Now these classes, the 3 classes of metabolic medications that they used, they included statins for cholesterol, blood pressure medications, calcium channel antagonist, statins for cholesterol, blood pressure meds like L-type calcium channel antagonist, and diabetes meds like metformin. Now these medications had an impact on mental metrics, especially reduced self-harm. Now brain energy theory explains why. Now statins for cholesterol, they are known to impair the mitochondrial function, and they are known to reduce the inflammation. So impairing mitochondrial function, reducing inflammation, it might have reduced hyperexcitability, so reduced the self-harm. Then these calcium channel blockers, blood pressure meds, they are also known to reduce hyperexcitability by reducing the amount of calcium in the cells. So they reduced hyperexcitability. So by reducing hyperexcitability in the cells, they reduce the aggressive behaviors or psychosis, etc., thereby reducing the chances of self-harm and hospitalization. Then the metformin, medication for diabetes. It is also known to play a direct role in mitochondrial function. So it might have also, giving metformin also had an impact on the mental health. Now, one important point to note is that trying to reduce or stop the psychiatric medications on your own, it can be very dangerous because this will cause withdrawal symptoms. So if you want to stop or reduce the psychiatric medications, you need to do this under the supervision of a medical professional, that is a doctor. And so symptoms might get worse quickly if you withdraw them all of a sudden. If you stop taking medications all of a sudden, symptoms can get worse quickly and new symptoms can also emerge. So if you want to reduce psychiatric meds, you need to do it under the supervision of a medical professional. Now we come to another factor which is impacting the mental and metabolic health, that is the hormones. Now hormones, what are they? Hormones, we know they are chemical messengers that are produced in one type of cell and they travel throughout the body to impact other cells. So these hormones, they are impacting mitochondria, and mitochondria are in turn impacting the hormones. And hormones are causing epigenetics changes, that is they are causing changes in the gene expression in the target cells. They are causing the cells to turn on or off. Hormones are changing the metabolism of cells, and in turn hormones they play a role in mental and metabolic disorders. Mitochondria supply energy for production and release of hormones. We know that mitochondria are supplying energy for the production as well as release of hormones, and they are also providing energy for production and release of neurotransmitters. Now mitochondria initiate the process of production of several key hormones. Now, many regulators of metabolism and mitochondrial function are there beyond hormones and neurotransmitters also. There are also other regulators of metabolism and mitochondrial function apart from hormones and neurotransmitters. Now, what are these other regulators of metabolism? These include neuropeptides. Neuropeptides can be in the form of hormones or neurotransmitters both. Mitokines, adipokines, and myokines. So, these are certain other regulators of metabolism and mitochondrial function beyond hormones and neurotransmitters. Now, RNA molecules, they are also regulators of metabolism and mitochondrial function. And so all these are other regulators of metabolism and mitochondrial function. These factors control different aspects of metabolic function under different circumstances. Now we come to an important hormone. We already studied one hormone that plays a crucial role in metabolism and mitochondrial function, that is insulin. Now we come to the next important hormone, that is cortisol. It is known as the stress hormone. High levels of cortisol have been associated with all metabolic disorders and numerous mental symptoms, including anxiety, fear, depression, mania, psychosis, cognitive impairment. High levels of cortisol in utero, that is when the fetus is in the womb, they affect the fetal development. They play a role in gene expression, that is epigenetics. And high levels of cortisol in utero can lead to later development of both mental and metabolic disorders. Now cortisol, its production, it always begins in the mitochondria. It begins in the mitochondria because mitochondria have got the enzyme that initiates the production of cortisol. Then after cortisol gets released into the bloodstream, after the cortisol is released into the bloodstream, then it enters the cells. It will enter the cells, and within the cell, it is going to bind to the glucocorticoid receptors. It will bind to the glucocorticoid receptors within the cells. So it is going to bind to the glucocorticoid receptors, and which then turns thousands of genes on and off by binding to specific sites on the DNA called glucocorticoid response elements. So there are specific sites on the, this is the DNA, specific sites on the DNA called as glucocorticoid response elements, and by binding to these glucocorticoid response elements, this cortisol is going to affect gene expression. Now the proteins from these genes then have widespread effects on cells, all related to metabolism. Now these gene expression will cause production of proteins, and these proteins are going to have widespread effects on metabolism, on widespread effects on the cells. So this was about the process of production of cortisol. Now, in addition to the glucocorticoid receptors in the cytoplasm and the glucocorticoid response elements that are located in the cell nucleus, it turns out that they are also directly located on the mitochondria too. So we will just summarize again the process of production of cortisol. Now what happens is that cortisol begins in the mitochondria because the mitochondria, they have got the enzymes that initiate its production. Now this is the brain. This is the outer layer of nerve tissue in the brain called the cortex, and there are certain cortical interneurons, and in these cortical interneuron cells there are mitochondria, and cortisol begins in the mitochondria in the cortical interneurons. It goes into the bloodstream and it enters the cells. When it enters the cells, it binds to certain receptors on the cells, which are the glucocorticoid receptors, and after binding to these receptors, it turns thousands of genes on and off by binding to specific sites on the DNA. Suppose this is the nucleus. Now a larger view of the nucleus. Suppose this is the cell. There are certain glucocorticoid receptors on the cell, and within the cell is the nucleus. In the nucleus there is the DNA, and the cortisol will bind to the glucocorticoid receptors on the cell, and then it is going to turn thousands of genes on and off by binding to specific sites on the DNA, which are known as glucocorticoid response elements. And after binding to them, it is going to have widespread effects on the metabolism. And these in addition to the glucocorticoid receptors, now these glucocorticoid receptors, these receptors are located in the cytoplasm of the cell. So in addition to the glucocorticoid receptors in the cytoplasm and the glucocorticoid response elements that are located in the cell nucleus, they are also directly located on the mitochondria. So these two things, glucocorticoid receptors and the glucocorticoid response elements, they are also located on the mitochondria. Both these things are also located on the mitochondria. So then there is a test, this dexamethasone suppression test, which measures fluctuations in cortisol throughout the day. So through this test, fluctuations in cortisol were measured, and it was seen that cortisol levels can actually be too high or low in different psychiatric patients. So some people will have high levels of cortisol throughout the day. Other people, especially those with severe trauma history, they can have abnormally low level of cortisol also. So cortisol is a hormone that connects metabolism and mitochondria with metabolic and mental health. Now we have studied about the hormone cortisol. Now we will study about another important hormone, that is thyroid hormone. And now thyroid is known as the master regulator of metabolism because it acts on each and every cell in the human body. So thyroid is acting on each and every cell in the human body. We know that the thyroid gland is secreting a hormone known as thyroxine. And this thyroxine hormone is controlling the basal metabolic rate. It is increasing the body temperature. It is regulating the heart rate, the pulse rate. It is increasing the rate of cellular respiration. It is also one important function of the thyroxine hormone is it is stimulating the rapid uptake of glucose in the body cells. This is a crucial function also related to metabolism, and it is also reducing the blood cholesterol levels. So thyroid hormone is reducing the blood cholesterol levels. Now thyroid hormone is increasing metabolism by revving up the mitochondria. So it is increasing the mitochondrial function. We know that hypothyroidism is a condition which is caused due to taking reduced levels of iodine. So this is deficiency of thyroid hormone can cause hypothyroidism. And this hypothyroidism can also be caused, it is caused by deficiency of thyroxine hormone. And why does this deficiency occur? This can be reduced due to reduced level of TSH hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone released by the pituitary gland. So hypothyroidism has been known to cause cretinism in children. So cretinism means stunted physical development and also reduced mental development in children. So this is about the thyroid hormone. Now if people have too much or too little thyroid, then problems can occur. Thyroid hormone can either directly or indirectly stimulates mitochondria to produce energy, that is ATP or heat. So thyroid hormone is stimulating the mitochondria to produce ATP or heat. Mitochondria also have thyroid hormone receptors on them. So they sometimes get the signals from the thyroid hormone directly. However, thyroid hormone also acts through genes in the nucleus. So this is the cell. This is the nucleus. Through genes in the nucleus, thyroid hormone is also acting, and then it is impacting mitochondria. So thyroid hormone is known to stimulate mitochondrial biogenesis, that is production of new mitochondria. It is stimulating the increase in the number of mitochondria. It induces mitochondrial repair process, also called mitophagy. Now we know hypothyroidism is when the thyroid gland is underactive. Less thyroid hormone is being produced. It is commonly due to an autoimmune disorder, but there are other causes also. And this can lead to many metabolic and mental symptoms, including weight gain, obesity. Hypothyroidism can cause weight gain, obesity, heart disease, fatigue, brain fog, that is confusion, and depression. What is less well known is that this hypothyroidism is also linked to bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, and dementia. So it is also linked to mental disorders. So this is how thyroid hormone activity is directly related to mitochondria and mental disorders. Because thyroid hormone is stimulating mitochondria to produce more ATP, and mitochondria also have receptors for thyroid hormone. So thyroid hormone is impacting mitochondria, and when there is deficiency of thyroid hormone, then it can also lead to mental disorders along with metabolic disorders. When hypothyroidism occurs during development, it can lead to neurological deficits, that is cretinism. It can cause stunted physical growth and also reduced mental development in children. It can impair the physical and mental development of children, which is also known as cretinism. Now, thyroid hormone is also used as a treatment. It has been used as a treatment for mental disorders for decades, even when people have normal levels. It is commonly used in treatment-resistant depression and bipolar disorder. It is used in treatment-resistant depression and bipolar disorder. Not only does this hormone, thyroid hormone, increase the metabolism immediately, it increases health and number of mitochondria. However, increased metabolism because of thyroid hormone, it also comes with increased risk of hyperactivity, of overstimulating the cells, especially hyperexcitable cells. And so sometimes thyroid hormone can also exacerbate the unwanted symptoms. Now we come to another hormone, that is estrogen. Estrogen, we know it is the female sex hormone, but apart from being a sex hormone, it has also some very important functions. It has profound effects on metabolism. It is known to play an important role in mental health, obesity, diabetes, and cardiovascular disease. It affects brain metabolism directly, and it has widespread effects on mood, cognition, and other brain functions. Now, mitochondria are directly involved in making of estrogen hormone. They control the first step in synthesis of estrogen. These mitochondria, they have got receptors for estrogen on them. And most estrogen receptors are not on mitochondria, but they are outside the cells. These receptors for estrogen, they are widely found throughout the brain also, on both neurons as well as non-neuronal cells, which are support cells for neuron, which are also called as glial cells. And these receptors for estrogen, they are found in both men and women. and they are found widely throughout the body. Many of the signaling pathways of estrogen, even when it binds to receptors outside the cell, they end up converging on mitochondria. So there is a direct relation between estrogen and mitochondria. And many women experience mental and metabolic symptoms relating to changes in estrogen levels. Now, some of these mental symptoms are given the name of PMDD, that is premenstrual dysphoric disorder. It is used to describe some of the mental symptoms due to changes in estrogen levels when they are severe. And it is said that women are twice as likely to experience depression as men. This is because of hormonal fluctuations and their effects on the metabolism of women. Also, blood loss due to menstruation, it results in loss of metabolic resources like iron, and this can take a metabolic toll. Now, during pregnancy and postpartum period, they are times of high risk for mental symptoms. Why? Because of hormonal changes, and also more importantly because pregnancy takes a heavy metabolic toll. So this can, lot of resources from the body are required to sustain the fetus, and this can reduce the resources available for the rest of the body, and this can take a metabolic toll leading to mental symptoms. So here we see pregnancy comes with increased risks of metabolic and mental disorders, weight gain more than needed to carry a healthy child, gestational diabetes, hypertension, seizures, and also an increase in mental disorders, exacerbation in mental disorders. Now, when women at the age of 45, after the age of 45, they experience a phenomenon called as menopause, that is a reduction in the estrogen levels. Now, these reduction in estrogen levels, these can also cause mental symptoms in women like depression, anxiety, mania, and psychosis, because estrogen is directly related to metabolism, and reduced estrogen can lead to reduced metabolism, and it can reduce the energy available for cells, and this can cause symptoms like depression, anxiety, mania, and even psychosis. So reduced brain energy metabolism due to menopause, leading to reduced mitochondrial health. So after menopause, women are at an increased risk for developing Alzheimer's disease compared to men. In some women, metabolism abnormalities will correct themselves automatically over time, but in others they may become permanent, putting these women at an increased risk for mental disorders and Alzheimer's. Now, in a study, researchers found a direct link between memory, estrogen, and mitochondria in rhesus monkeys. They found that monkeys with poor memory, so those monkeys that had poor memory, they had malformed donut-shaped mitochondria in their at synapses in their prefrontal cortex. So in their prefrontal cortex of the brain, they had malformed mitochondria. And when the researchers, they surgically induced menopause in the monkeys, this led to reduced estrogen levels, and this increased the number of defective mitochondria. So this shows that reduced estrogen levels can reduce the number of healthy mitochondria. It can adversely affect the mitochondria. And when the researchers gave the monkey an estrogen replacement therapy, when an estrogen replacement therapy was given to the monkeys, then the levels of estrogen increased, and this led to improvement in mitochondrial function. This led to improvement in the mitochondrial function. So this led to reduced number of these malformed mitochondria because new mitochondrial biogenesis took place. So now some women also, estrogen is also used as a treatment. Some women are taking oral contraception, and these contraceptive pills, they are causing, they contain both estrogen and progesterone, and when these pills are taken, then it may cause a hormonal imbalance, because the levels of estrogen and progesterone in these pills is not the same as the levels in the body. So this hormonal imbalance can cause depression symptoms also. So the women, they need to ensure that if they are taking these oral contraceptive pills, then they also need to contact a medical practitioner so that adequate interventions can be made so that their metabolic health is not compromised. Now we just discussed about menopause and the plummeting estrogen levels, which cause an adverse effect on metabolic health. So sometimes these changes can correct themselves. Sometimes the metabolic health can be restored automatically by the body. But sometimes when this doesn't happen, when the changes become permanent or the metabolic health is going down, then sometimes the hormonal replacement therapy after menopause, it may help with adverse menopausal symptoms. Now we come to another important factor which is affecting the mitochondrial health and affecting the mental as well as metabolic health. This is inflammation. Most people are thinking of it as a bad thing. Low grade inflammation is often found in people with metabolic and mental disorders. And some people even think that this neuroinflammation may be the root cause of at least some mental and neurological disorders. Now, cytokine storms. Cytokines are basically proteins. They are pro-inflammatory proteins. So these proteins are released in response to inflammation. So cytokines, they are small proteins that are released by the cells. These are small proteins that are released by the cells. They are released by the cells to signal the immune system, and to control the activity of other cells. And they can stimulate or slow down. They can either stimulate the immune system or they can slow down the immune system. So this is what cytokines are. And cytokines are pro-inflammatory. They cause inflammation. So when these cytokines are released in the adequate quantity, they are beneficial. They are triggering an immune response. They are regulating the immune system. They are either stimulating or slowing down the immune system. But when they are released in large quantity, then they can prove detrimental. They can damage the metabolic health. And sometimes they can even kill. So cytokine storms an overactive inflammatory response. When too much of cytokines are released, then it leads to an overactive inflammatory response. This can even kill people with COVID. Now, lingering inflammation is one of the primary causes for long COVID. So long COVID means that after the virus is gone, after that also people keep developing more disorders, more metabolic dysfunction. This is because of lingering inflammation, in which people have mental and neurological symptoms for months after the infection. Now, autoimmune disorders, in which the immune system is attacking the person's own body, are when the inflammation in immune system are attacking the person's own body. Now, this chronic inflammation can also be caused by a leaky gut. We know that the gut, the small and large intestine, they have got a barrier function. There are certain beneficial gut microbes in the gut, and there are certain cells that are lining the intestinal tract. And these cells that are lining the intestinal tract, they are performing a barrier function. That is, they are only permitting the beneficial molecules to penetrate or to go to the other cells in the body, and they are ensuring that the waste molecules like ammonia, etc., they are thrown out of the body. So this is the barrier function of gut cells. And gut includes the entire alimentary canal from the mouth to the anus, and the barrier function in the intestinal cells. Now, when these intestinal cells, these cells that are lining the wall of the intestine, when they become leaky, they become more permeable. When these cells become more permeable, then what happens is that these waste products, they also might enter, they might penetrate through these cells, and they may have an adverse effect on other cells in the body. Because earlier these waste products were being retained in the intestine itself, they were being thrown out of the body, but now they can penetrate the walls of the intestinal cells. And as a result, this can have adverse effects on the body. So this is a leaky gut. Now leaky gut will cause foreign particles to access the body, to enter the body, and this can also cause chronic inflammation. Now for these reasons we have heard that inflammation causes much of what ails us, and we are told to reduce inflammation. But the next thing is that inflammation is not always bad. It is not always bad. It has got certain beneficial effects also. And inflammation occurs all the time. It is usually a normal process. So inflammation is usually a normal process having countless beneficial roles. It is involved in fighting of infections and healing injuries. So it has beneficial roles. It is involved in fighting of infections. It is involved in healing of injuries. It serves important signaling functions also. So fighting infections, healing injuries, important signaling functions. It is involved in normal stress response. And inflammatory cytokines, they are a way to send stress signals throughout the body. So when a cell is stressed, then certain signals in the form of damage associated molecular patterns are sent to the other cells as a form of stress response so that the body can adapt to the stress. So mitochondria serve as some of these damage associated molecular patterns. Now microglial cells, which are the brain's immune cells, they play a role in brain development, learning and inflammation. Now these microglial cells, they are a form of glial cells, and we know that glial cells, these glial cells, they are non-neuronal cells. They are non-neuronal cells and they act as support cells. They act as support cells for the neurons in the body. And these microglial cells, they are playing a role in brain development, in learning and in inflammation. So these microglial cells are playing a role in brain development, learning and inflammation. And without inflammation we would die. So inflammation is definitely something which has beneficial effects also. Now inflammation is one way in which the body allocates and uses metabolic resources. So inflammation is one way in which the body is allocating and using the metabolic resources, thereby affecting metabolism. Now what happens is when inflammation is occurring, then suppose in one part of the body inflammation is occurring, then this means that that part of the body is stressed and it needs more metabolic resources to counter the effects of stress. So inflammation is one way in which the body allocates and uses metabolic resources, thereby affecting metabolism. Now inflammation can happen in the other way also. Inflammation can happen in the other way also. In mental states can also cause inflammation. See, inflammation, when inflammation is occurring in one part of the body, it means that suppose a part of the body is stressed, then it will send damage associated molecular patterns to send a signal that this part of the body needs more resources to counter the effects of stress. Now when resources are channeled to this part of the body, then resources will become deficient in other parts of the body. And this can take a metabolic toll. And this can also trigger certain mental symptoms. When inflammation occurs over a prolonged period of time, or when it is extreme, then the metabolic toll can trigger mental and metabolic disorders also. So when inflammation is occurring for a prolonged period of time, then it can take a mental toll also. It can exacerbate mental symptoms also. So both mental as well as metabolic disorders can be triggered by inflammation which is occurring for a prolonged period of time, or when the inflammation is extreme. Now when infections, allergies cancers and autoimmune disorders flare up, there can be an increase in new onset mental disorders. When infections, allergies, cancers, and autoimmune disorders, when they flare up, when these infections are then there will be inflammation, and when the inflammation is there, that means metabolic resources are being sent to that region which is stressed. So rest of the body may have less metabolic resources. This can trigger mental symptoms also if it is for a prolonged period. So when infections, allergies, cancers, etc. they flare up, there can be increase in new onset mental disorders and increase of mental symptoms in people with existing disorders. Now we'll see certain examples. People with rhinitis, that is people with runny nose, from something like hay fever, they will have inflammation. We know that common cold causes inflammation. People with runny noses, they will have inflammation. And because of inflammation, they are 86% more likely to develop mental symptom of depression. Now, these inflammatory conditions are also well-known causes of delirium, that is acute mental disturbance in the elderly. So it is compromising the metabolism. Inflation, if a region is stressed, it causes inflammation. Metabolic resources are sent to that region. Metabolic resources become deficient in other regions, and this can cause metabolic problems. This can also exacerbate the mental symptoms like delirium. So inflammatory conditions are well-known causes of delirium in the elderly. Likewise, there can be increase in symptoms of metabolic disorders also due to inflammation. For example, blood sugar can go up in people with diabetes due to infections causing inflammation. Metabolism may be compromised and blood sugar may go up in people with diabetes. People with cardiovascular disease can see an increase in their blood pressure. They can experience chest pain or suffer another heart attack. Now another study. A large population study of more than 1 million children in Denmark found that children who were hospitalized for serious infections, they were 84% more likely to develop a subsequent mental disorder. So if these children, they had serious infections, so infections causing inflammation, calling for metabolic resources to that part of the body where the infection is occurring, causing a deficiency of metabolic resources in other parts, and taking a metabolic toll and also causing mental disorders. Now next, inflation and mitochondria. How is inflation impacting mitochondria and how is mitochondria impacting inflation? Now mitochondria are involved in many aspects of the normal inflammatory response. So mitochondria are involved in turning the inflammatory response both on and off. Inflation in turn can impair mitochondrial function. So inflation can also impair mitochondrial function. So mitochondria are involved in many aspects of the normal inflammatory response. They are affecting inflation, and inflation can also impair mitochondrial function. Furthermore, mitochondrial dysfunction even from other causes can lead to inflation. Now certain environmental factors, suppose alcohol or certain hormonal imbalances, neurotransmitter imbalances, they can cause mitochondrial dysfunction, we know, and this mitochondrial dysfunction can lead to inflation. And inflation can also impair mitochondrial function. So this is clearly a feedback cycle. Mitochondria play a role in normal inflation. They are responsible for different phases of wound healing in macrophages. Now macrophages are white blood cells, a type of white blood cells that perform the role of phagocytosis. That is eating up the foreign matter, the foreign microbes, etc. So mitochondria play a role in normal inflation, and these mitochondria, they are responsible for different phases of wound healing in macrophages. So macrophages are involved in the different phases of wound healing because these are white blood cells. So they help in wound healing, and there are different phases of wound healing. The macrophages are involved in it, and mitochondria are playing a role in how the macrophages are changing between different phases of wound healing, how the macrophages are playing a role in wound healing. Mitochondria influence the functioning of macrophages. Now, according to an article, mitochondria in innate immune response. Now, this was the article, research article. It reviewed many ways in which the mitochondria are directly or indirectly involved in immune response. including fighting viruses, bacteria, and also playing a role in cell damage and stress. Then another research paper found that mitochondria play a role in immune cell death when the time comes to turn off the immune response. Now, when the immune cells have done their work and when it is time to turn the immune response off, then mitochondria are playing a role in immune cell death. Now, if mitochondria are functioning properly in the cell, there will be no problems with inflammation and immune cell response. But if the mitochondria are not functioning properly, then there will be problems with inflammation and immune cell function. When mitochondria are not working properly, it can lead to overactive or underactive immune response, overactive or underactive inflammatory response. And this abnormality, inflammatory response, overactive. Now, I'll correct myself. When mitochondria are not functioning properly, then it can lead to an overactive or underactive immune response, and it can lead to an inflammatory response. And these responses have been observed in many mental and metabolic disorders. Now, inflammation directly impacts the function of mitochondria. How? For example, tumor necrosis factor. Now, this tumor necrosis factor is a type of inflammatory cytokine. It is a protein, it is an inflammatory cytokine, and this has been directly known to inhibit mitochondrial function. So, this tumor necrosis factor, it is an inflammatory cytokine. So, cytokine, we know it is a protein, pro-inflammatory protein, and this TNF is a type of inflammatory cytokine. It is inhibiting the function of mitochondria. So, in this way, an inflammatory cytokine is inhibiting the function of mitochondria. Then another example, interferon. It is another inflammatory cytokine. Now, interferon is another inflammatory cytokine, and its production, the production of interferon is influenced by mitochondria. Production of interferon is influenced by mitochondria. And interferon also influences mitochondria. Interferon has been shown to directly inhibit 3 mitochondrial genes, resulting in changes in the functioning of mitochondria. And interferon has been shown to directly suppress the mitochondrial energy production. So, interferon has been known to suppress the mitochondrial ATP production in some brain cells. And what makes this important example is that interferon can be given to people as a medication when treating serious infections or cancers, because interferon is playing an inhibitory role. It is suppressing ATP production in mitochondria, so it is in a way reducing the hyperexcitable cells. So it can be given as a treatment in serious infections. Again, I'll correct myself. We will study this point again. Interferon has been shown to directly suppress mitochondrial ATP production. So interferon is known to suppress the mitochondrial energy production in some brain cells. And interferon can be given to people as a medication when treating serious infections. It is given as a medication for serious infections. Maybe because of its role in reducing hyperexcitability, it is given as a medication in serious infections. Or maybe there is some other reason. Now, shortly after giving interferon, psychiatric symptoms. Now, this is not sure why interferon is given as a medication when treating serious infections or cancer. For this, I am not very sure about why it is given, because this you need to find it out from other sources. Now, but this is a fact that it is given as a medication to people for treating serious infections and cancer. Now, interferon, we know that it is suppressing the mitochondrial energy production. It is affecting the mitochondria. So sometimes after giving interferon, psychiatric symptoms can appear to worsen. Psychiatric symptoms like depression, fatigue, irritability, manic symptoms, etc. can appear to worsen. So this interferon is an inflammatory cytokine, it is affecting the mitochondrial function, it is suppressing the mitochondrial energy production, and mitochondria are also influencing the production of interferon. So there is a feedback cycle. So in simple words, inflammation and mitochondria are in a feedback cycle with each other. So sometimes after giving interferon, psychiatric symptoms they can appear to worsen. And this can also include delirium, which is an acute mental disturbance. Now all existing mental disorders, they can get worse with interferon. So existing mental disorders can get worse with interferon. So one drug, that is interferon, can produce almost every symptom known to psychiatry. All these symptoms like depression, fatigue, irritability, insomnia, suicidal behavior, mania, anxiety, psychosis, concentration difficulty. Why is it that one drug interferon, which is an inflammatory cytokine, it can produce psychiatric symptoms, lots of psychiatric symptoms? Why? Because of mitochondria. Because interferon, which is an inflammatory cytokine, it is affecting the function of mitochondria, and mitochondria are also affecting the production of interferon. So there is a feedback cycle. Now, pregnant women with inflammation, pregnant women with infections, if pregnant women are having infections, then it can lead to inflammation. And this can increase the likelihood of the child having autism. Because inflammation can lead to mitochondrial dysfunction, and this can adversely affect the child's mental health. Now, cells that are metabolically compromised, they can fall into a state of disrepair. These cells, they can have maintenance problems, they can shrink or they can die. They can have high levels of oxidative stress. So if there is a maintenance problem in the cell, if they are metabolically compromised, then there will be maintenance problems, they may die, and they may have high levels of oxidative stress, and all this can trigger inflammation. So why are the cells metabolically compromised? Mainly because of mitochondrial dysfunction. So if there is mitochondrial dysfunction, it can cause maintenance problems in the cells, it can lead to oxidative stress, and it can trigger inflammation. Now suppose a cell is, the cell can be metabolically compromised because of other reasons also, because of certain pre-existing vulnerabilities. Now we suppose this cell is metabolically compromised, that is, it is not functioning properly. So it will have maintenance problems, it may die, it may shrink, and this can trigger inflammation. Now when there is inflammation, then cells will send out signals in the form of damage associated molecular patterns that these cells are in need of repair. And sometimes mitochondria themselves act as damage associated molecular patterns. Sometimes parts of mitochondria also act as dams. And when these damage associated molecular patterns, which are sometimes mitochondria, when these are released from the cells, from the struggling cells, then it is going to trigger inflammation. Now the low-grade inflammation associated with all mental and metabolic disorders is likely a consequence of widespread metabolic dysfunction. Now to address this problem of metabolic dysfunction, we need to understand what is causing these metabolic problems. So these metabolic problems can be caused by factors like poor diet, stress, hormonal problems, lack of sleep, heavy use of alcohol or drugs or other toxins. Now environmental factors may be causing these metabolic problems. Now in order to address this problem, we need to address the metabolic dysfunction in the cells. Now the role of inflammation in treatments. So what is the role of inflammation in treatment? Now suppressing inflammation is definitely an area of great interest. Researchers have been studying antioxidants and anti-inflammatory agents for both mental and metabolic disorders. So researchers have been studying antioxidants like vitamin E, omega-3 fatty acids, N-acetylcysteine, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory medications. So all these are antioxidants. and researchers have been trying to use these for reducing inflammation. They've been studying these and their effect on inflammation. Now these anti-inflammatory things, they may have some benefits, they may give slight benefit for some mental disorders, but improvements, when researchers studied them, they found that the improvements were minimal, very less improvement, and they were usually not meaningful improvements. So on functions, it is possible that suppressing it with medications can have unintended adverse consequences. Now if you try to stop inflammation by means of medications, then it can have adverse consequences in the long run. So we can see that these antioxidants are not having any meaningful impact, and trying to suppress the inflammation with medications is also not having such a meaningful impact. Now many lifestyle factors that can cause widespread metabolic dysfunction, like suppose alcohol use, many of the lifestyle factors, they can lead to chronic inflammation. Now you try to take an antioxidant like vitamin E or omega-3 fatty acid to counteract the negative effects of these lifestyle factors. This does not work. Now autoimmune disorders in which the immune system is attacking the person's own body, they are also associated with high levels of inflammation, and they play a role in mental and metabolic disorders. So addressing this is important, and this might require anti-inflammatory treatments. In case of autoimmune disorders, it may require anti-inflammatory treatments. And in other cases of disorders, it might require addressing hormonal deficiencies also. Now, in case of chronic infections, when the body is unable to eliminate any infection, any viral or bacterial infection, it takes a metabolic toll on the body and it can lead to problems. Now, diseases like HIV, AIDS, chronic Lyme disease, hepatitis, these can play a role in metabolic and mental health. So, in case of chronic infections, we need to work with the doctor, with the healthcare provider to address these using appropriate treatment. So, you need to consult a doctor in case of these chronic infections. Then allergies, they can also cause chronic inflammation. So allergies can also cause inflammation, and sometimes you can avoid the allergens, but other times sometimes it is not possible to avoid the allergens. So in that case, you need to work with your doctor and select appropriate treatments. Now dental hygiene also reduces inflammation. It is a way to reduce a source of inflammation in your body. So we need to pay attention to dental hygiene. And dental hygiene can also play a role in both. Poor dental hygiene can be a cause of both mental and metabolic disorders. So this was about the role of inflammation. Now next we come to sleep, light and circadian rhythm. So how these impact our mental as well as our metabolic health. Now researchers, they identified a protein known as DRP1 that plays a central role in mitochondrial fission and energy production. So this protein, it was playing a central role in mitochondrial fission, that is dividing of mitochondria, and energy production. Now the circadian clock, that is the clock which regulates the time we sleep and we wake up, it controls this protein DRP1. Now circadian clock is controlling this protein DRP1, and this protein, which is playing a central role in mitochondrial fission and energy production, this is synchronizing our mitochondrial function with our daily circadian rhythm. Now what happens is this DRP1, it is playing a role in mitochondrial fission and energy production, and this protein is being controlled by the circadian clock, that is the time when we sleep or the time when we wake up. And our mitochondrial function is synchronized with the daily circadian rhythm. Like when we wake up, the mitochondria may start producing more energy, or when we sleep, the mitochondria may start producing less energy. So this synchronization of the circadian clock is occurring, synchronization of the circadian clock with the mitochondria is taking place. And circadian clock is also controlling the production of a protein called as DRP1. And this protein, DRP1, is playing a role in mitochondrial fission and energy production. So in simple words, we can say the circadian clock is controlling the protein called DRP1, and this protein DRP1 is influencing mitochondrial fission and energy production, mitochondrial fission and energy production. So this protein is impacting mitochondrial fission and energy production. So in this way, the circadian clock is impacting the mitochondrial function by means of this protein called DRP1. Now DRP1 is necessary for feedback to the circadian clock. So this DRP1 is also giving a feedback to the circadian clock, suggesting that mitochondria may be influencing the circadian clock themselves. So circadian clock is being influenced by mitochondria, and mitochondria are being influenced by circadian clock through this protein DRP1, and circadian clock is also being influenced by mitochondria, again a feedback mechanism. Now there is an area of the brain called as SCN, that is suprachiasmatic nucleus, and this protein SCN, it plays a key role in the circadian rhythm, in controlling the circadian rhythm. This area of our brain, suprachiasmatic nucleus, it detects light from our eyes and generates hormonal and nervous system responses. So this area of the brain, that is SCN, it is detecting light from our eyes, it is generating adequate hormonal and nervous system responses. Now poor sleep can cause mitochondrial dysfunction. It can lead to cognitive impairment and Alzheimer's disease. Now hypothalamus. Hypothalamus, we know that it is a gland which is controlling the function of pituitary gland. It is also involved in hunger and thirst. Now hypothalamus, it is an area of the brain known to regulate metabolism, and many hormones like cortisol are also being regulated by the hypothalamus. Now hormones play a role in sleep and mitochondrial function also. Now when the level of stress hormone cortisol is abnormal during the night, then it can, now again I correct myself, when there are sleep problems, when we have problem in sleeping, then it can cause abnormal levels of cortisol, that is more cortisol than needed can be produced. The levels of cortisol will be different from what is normally there. So this abnormal level of cortisol is caused by sleep problems. And when there is abnormal cortisol level, then the cortisol level can then impact the brain function. The cortisol level can then impact the brain function, and it can cause cognitive impairment also. So in simple words, sleep problems can cause cognitive impairment through abnormal levels of cortisol. Then we know that serotonin is converted into melatonin hormone during night, and this melatonin increases at night and reduces in the morning. And this melatonin hormone, which increases at night, it is found to directly stimulate the mitochondrial repair process or mitophagy. Now lack of melatonin induced mitophagy can lead to cognitive deficits in mice. Now if the mitophagy is reduced because of reduced levels of melatonin, then it can cause cognitive deficits in mice. So we can correlate this with humans also. If melatonin is reduced, then mitophagy will be reduced, and it can cause cognitive deficits in humans also. This is a correlation because the study was conducted in mice. So since the lack of melatonin induced mitophagy caused cognitive impairment in mice, so they can have similar effects on humans also. So this was about the sleep, light and circadian rhythms, which are affecting our mitochondria and also affecting our mental and metabolic health. So in the part 4 of the summary of the book Brain Energy, we studied about different factors like inflammation, like the sleep, light and circadian rhythms, like the different hormones like thyroid, estrogen, cortisol, etc. And also about the different psychiatric medications and their impact on metabolism and mental health. Now in the part 5 of the summary of the book Brain Energy, we are going to study about the role of food, fasting and your gut in our metabolic and mental health. We'll also study about insulin resistance and the role of exercise. The role of exercise in mental and metabolic health and how insulin resistance affects our metabolic health. Then we will also study about a dietary intervention like intermittent fasting or fasting mimicking diets like the ketogenic diet, which have been seen to improve metabolic health and also seen to improve the effects on the seen to cause improvement in people with mental disorders. And it has also, Dr. Chris Palmer has shown that it has also caused remission of symptoms, complete remission in some patients with mental disorders. So we will be studying all these in the part 5 of the summary of the book Brain Energy, written by Dr. Christopher Palmer. Thank you.